Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me for another episode of Connected Homeschooling. I'm very pleased to introduce my guest, Mary Prather. And she's the mom of two children, and she runs a site called Homegrown Learners. So, Mary, welcome to the show.
Hi, Devin. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's my pleasure. And on the homeschooling show, on this podcast, I love to bring on people who are doing remarkable things, people who have something of value to bring to the audience, whether it's people listening on iTunes or Stitcher or from the website, or people who may be watching on YouTube. So I'm glad to bring you onto the show and just to share your story. And every time I do these interviews, I learn something new. And I think even some of the people who may read what you put out or consume some of the content you put out may be able to find out something interesting about you or even your story. So I want to just jump right in. And each week I have a guest on, or try to do on a weekly basis, but I try to have a guest on and have them to tell their story and to bless the audience even with a scripture or a word that may help them out. But before we get to that, I'd like for you to just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, I live just south of Atlanta, and I have been homeschooling for about 5 years now.
Okay.
Prior to that, I stayed at home with my children, and before I had my children, I was an elementary music specialist. And I've been married to my husband Hal for almost 17 years.
Okay. Well, that's great. You're a fellow music enthusiast, and
Yep.
say you're an expert in that area. Well, as I mentioned, we like to encourage our viewers and our listeners with a scripture. And so I've asked you to prepare something. Why don't you take it away with that?
Okay. This, and I'll read it. I don't have the whole thing memorized, but it is from James 1, and it's verses 2 through 4. And I find that this is real encouraging to me on my homeschool journey. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything.
Okay, thank you for sharing that, and that's definitely something that is encouraging. At times you run into obstacles, and at times it may be a struggle to consider it joy, but we should.
Right.
And so I'll be sharing that in the show notes for anyone who uh, wants to just have that and add it to uh, just some encouraging words for them in this homeschool journey.
Right.
And speaking of the homeschooling journey, why don't you share with us how you got involved with homeschooling? It's always interesting to just learn from the guests how they even found out about homeschooling or just ended up in the world of homeschooling.
Um, well, I think the first time I really found out about homeschooling, I had a friend that was homeschooling her children. And at the time, my oldest was just in preschool. And I actually remember saying to my husband, I don't think she actually wants to, get a job or go on with her life without her children. She's just going to keep them at home so she has something to do. I was very uninformed, very uninformed. I had a master's degree in educational administration. I sent my child to public school until third grade. And I don't really know what changed, but it was as I kept volunteering at her school, I just had this nagging feeling that I could do it better. And I think for about 2 years, God just slowly chipped away at my husband and I until finally, one Thanksgiving break, we just packed up everything out of her desk and pulled her out of school. My youngest has never been to school. He went to a Christian pre-K, and then he came home for kindergarten after that.
Okay. Now, in terms of your style or what you use to homeschool, is there any specific curriculum or practice that you use?
right. Um, when we first started out, since I was really unsure of what I was doing, we were using Sunlight. I liked that everything was in a box, and I loved the literature because my daughter loves to read. From there, I got a little more confident, and the next year I kind of started piecing everything together on my own. We did some unit studies, we did interest-led learning. At times, we were even kind of unschoolers. Once my daughter hit middle school, probably 2 years ago, we decided we needed to be much more intentional. I was starting to think about transcripts and college and things like that. And so I'd heard a lot of great things about classical conversations. And now we're going into our second year with classical conversations. And I think we're settled with it. We love it, and it's working very well for us.
Okay, and that's one of the things that I notice is when people start out, they want a little bit more structure and maybe something that's packaged or put in a box and it's already laid out for them. But then as they get a little bit more confident, they may go more towards unschooling or just a little less structured approach. But I see
Right.
also in your case, you as your children got a little bit older, and then you think about giving them more structure or preparing them for college or whatever the case may be, then you may kind of go back toward uh, the area of a more structured approach. And it seems like that's where people they gravitate toward once they get a little bit older, and parents are confident either way over time. But it seems like classical conversations is something that gives a good, well-rounded education for the kids.
It does, and
Well,
I think,
yeah, go
go ahead.
ahead. No,
Well,
I was
what I
just
like
saying that
about
I was just saying that classical conversations tends to give a well-rounded approach based on what I've heard about it and experienced.
right, it does very much, and what I like is that I know that they're learning everything that they're supposed to know, but I still have some freedom and some flexibility because I'm homeschooling because God created each of my children unique, and I want to tailor their education.
Okay. Now, without a doubt, you've probably run into some challenges with homeschooling, and sometimes it can be just internal, or it can be external factors. Maybe people who just don't agree with it, or you just had issues with a particular approach or curriculum. Share with us some of the challenges that you
Um, well, I think it seems really cliche, but I would have to say that math is
had.
a real challenge for me. I am not a mathematically minded person, um, and I am raising a son who is awesome at math. And I have to be able to teach my daughter her upper level math now. So that was always a challenge for me. I finally settled on Saxon Math, and they have some great teacher CDs that we use. And I'm finding that if I actually sit down and do math, like the exact same math that my child is doing, it goes a lot better than if I just say, here, go do your lesson, and I'll help you if you have any problems. So that was one of our biggest challenges. I think another challenge in the beginning was that most of our friends were school. So we either lost some friends or we didn't have time for friends anymore. Um, and now it seemed that our friend base is mostly other homeschoolers. So we kind of had a shifting in our whole life and in our whole perspective. So that was challenging for a couple of years, for the new Prather family to evolve.
Yeah, I can imagine that would be something that would take its toll on you, especially if you have friends who don't homeschool or may not understand your lifestyle in homeschooling, and just having to regroup and maybe find some people who are like-minded in that sense. Just because
Right.
sometimes if people aren't involved in the same things, then your mindset on things or your approach is just going to be different. And I think that we all homeschool, whether our kids are home with us or not. I just think it's just the level of attention you're going to provide. And there may be people that their kids go to public or private school, but they still put in that time and make sure their kids are getting the attention and that they even share some lessons that aren't maybe being covered in the classroom. So
Right.
one of the concerns with homeschooling is, well, people always ask, what about socialization? And how do you answer that question?
Um, well, I guess if I'm feeling a little bit snarky, sometimes I'll say, well, you don't send your kids to school to socialize. You send them to school to learn. Um, and then I will actually, detail for people how my kids, we go to classical conversations once a week. My child is in extracurricular sports. I have another child that sings in an extracurricular choir. I think my kids are socializing with all types of people and all ages of people. And when they grow up, they're not going to work in an office with, 30 people the same age. So I actually think I'm giving them a bigger picture or a more accurate.
Okay, I think I lost Mary, but I'm going to try to add her back in. Okay, you're back.
Yep, I'm sorry. Something just all of a sudden everything just cut out on me.
Okay, no problem. What we're going to do is resume the interview. And you were
Okay.
talking about how your kids are not going to be in the classroom with people all their age. So what we'll
Right,
do
right.
is let's take a pause for about 5 seconds, and then you can pick up from there.
Okay. I think we were just talking about how when they're going to grow up one day, they're not going to work in a job with 30 people that are the same age as them. So I think I'm giving them a more accurate picture of what their lives will look like through homeschooling.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for sharing that. And I
Yeah.
think that in terms of socialization, there's just so much concern that really isn't warranted. And just think a lot of times it's just people who maybe just afraid, or a lot of times people look at maybe the worst examples of a person who may seem unsocialized or may not be a person who fits easily into society, and then try to lump everybody in the same category. And I just don't think that's fair. You can probably find
Right.
some of the same examples in someone who attends a public school or a private school, but we don't point out that one kid and say, "Oh yeah, those public school kids are not socialized." So it's
Right.
just that's just the way it is. But let's continue on, and we're actually going to talk about homegrown learners. I'm interested in learning how that came about and how I guess how you got started with that.
Um, well, I had just brought my daughter home, and quite frankly, I was kind of at loose ends. Um, it was a hard transition for me having my child at home all the time, and I just really needed a creative outlet. And so my husband, who had started a blog before, said, "Well, why don't you start a blog?" And originally I just kind of started writing my own ramblings. And then I discovered that actually some people were reading it, and I was making some good friends online, and it just kind of took off from there.
Okay. Now, is this your first business venture, or I guess,
This is, yeah, it's my first business venture online. I
okay.
had always run a small piano studio out of my home, but this was my very first business venture online.
Okay. Now imagine I'm a first-time visitor to the site, and I'm just wanting to come there. I guess what would I be looking for, or what could I expect from homegrown learners?
Probably the biggest thing that you would find, and it's what most people usually come, are Lego ideas. I work with Lego Education as one of their bloggers, which means that we have all of the Lego Education homeschool products in our house, and my son uses them. We review them, we talk about them, we're big fans of their curriculum. So that's the number one thing that people come to my site for. After that, people are coming just for general homeschool encouragement. I just put out an ebook yesterday called "You Can Homeschool." That's encouragement for the journey of homeschooling. And people also like to come to my site for free music lessons. I have a music appreciation curriculum called Super Quiet Uninterrupted Listening Time, or SQUILT. And people come there, and I have free lessons, as well as a curriculum that you can purchase as well.
Okay, well that's pretty cool, and we'll be checking that out for sure. We're a musical family, and that's something that we do have an appreciation for. So we'll be checking out that resource, and I'll be sure to link up to that in the show notes for this episode. So anyone
Great.
listening can check out the links to all of that, and anything that we mention of value in this interview. Where we have a URL, I'll be sure to put those in the show notes. Um, we're going to transition to a segment that I like to call Seven with Devin, and this is our somewhat of our lightning round, where I'm going to give you some questions back to back, and you give me your best answer. And doesn't really matter the length of your answers, just you thinking and giving us something that would help out people who check out the show.
Okay.
So the first two questions are related, and I don't care if you're biased or not, and you want to recommend your own stuff or anything. But I guess what would be the top free resource that you recommend for homeschoolers, and then what would be the top paid resource?
Okay. The top free resource, I love Project Gutenberg. You can download so many great books for free, and some books on there that I love are some composer biographies by Thomas Tapper. My kids love them. So Project Gutenberg is my top free resource. My top paid resource is notebooking pages. It's at notebookingpages.com. My kids love to notebook in our homeschool, and I've been doing a series of YouTube videos on notebooking through classical conversations. So
Okay.
that's my favorite paid resource.
All right, great. And actually, I've heard of notebooking and different things. I believe,
Jimmy.
yeah, Jimmy Langley has Notebooking Fairy and
Yep.
different resources out there, but I hadn't heard of your free resource, so we'll be sure to link up to that as well.
Okay.
Um, so let's move to the third question. Third question is, if you could start your homeschooling journey over, guess what would be your first step, or what would you do differently?
Um, I would start sooner. I would start. I would beginning. I wouldn't delay. I wouldn't have ignored that voice in my gut when I took my daughter to kindergarten that this wasn't where she needed to be. I would have just had confidence as a young mom to start.
Okay. Well, speaking of someone starting, let's say there's a mom out there, a dad listening who is considering homeschooling and they're wanting to get started. Guess what would be your best advice for them starting out?
I would say read a lot. Don't worry about teaching your children to read. Um, they learn how to read sitting on your lap. And I would say just read out loud a lot to your kids, enjoy them, foster that relationship, and have fun. Because there will come a time when you do have to buckle down. And veteran moms told me that, and I thought, no, 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 it's really important that we learn how to do multiplication in first grade. Um, but that's not what's really important. It's your relationship with your kids.
I'm glad you shared that. I think it's something that a lot of times we need a reminder of. So
Mm-hmm.
very very good advice, and I'm sure it's going to be helpful to someone, if not even with our family. It's a great reminder. The next two questions are somewhat related as well. And the first is, what has been your greatest reward in homeschooling your children? And then, secondly, what has been your greatest challenge?
Mm. Um, I think my greatest reward is learning alongside of them and watching them grow into caring, compassionate children that like to serve. Just today, we were out somewhere in a store, and the clerk said to me, "You have such well-mannered children." And that to me is the greatest reward, to know that I am training them every step of the way and that I have that influence on them.
Okay.
The greatest, yeah, the greatest challenge is that homeschooling points out a lot of my flaws. It points out sometimes that I'm impatient or that I like to cut corners on a math problem. um, or that sometimes I'm not as diligent as I need to be. So I think homeschooling is always refining me, and sometimes that can be a painful process.
Wow. And when you said that, it brought me back to actually the beginning of this podcast, because I had on one of my good friends, Jackie Bledsoe, who's a
Mm,
homeschool dad, and um, someone very close to me, and I asked him that exact same question, and that's what he said. It just exposed a lot of things in him, and
right.
it's just amazing how that can happen. But when you are spending that much time with the children, and you're their primary teacher, or you're focused in and really honing their skills, you're also having to deal with your issues and the things that you may have to work through. And so that's something that points it out, and definitely makes it out in the open where you have to address it.
Right, and especially as they are entering their teen years, they're real quick to point out your flaws too. And that's
Yeah,
painful sometimes.
yeah. Thankfully, I have a few years before I get there, but
Enjoy
but
it.
yeah, we'll be sure to enjoy it. So great answers to those questions. And our last question in Seven with Devin is, what's a unique talent or characteristic about you that maybe other people wouldn't know?
Um, Gosh, I had trouble with this one because I think my talents are all out there um, on the blog. I think maybe one that people wouldn't know is that I think I consider myself to be a really good listener. I'm a really good friend to people, and that's something that's actually improved since I've been homeschooling. I found I've had more time and more patience for relationships.
Okay, cool. Well, what we'll do to close this interview out is just why don't you share with us where people can find you on the web or social media, anything you care to share.
Sure. People can come to my blog at homegrownlearners.com. And I think in your show notes too, you're going to put my social media links and all that.
That's correct.
I also have a website for my music curriculum, which is squiltmusic.com. And I'm offering your readers a discount on all of the Squilt volumes. So if they will enter a code that will be in your show notes, they'll be able to get 25% off Squilt volumes.
All right. Well, that's very generous of you, and I appreciate you taking care of the listeners and supporters of Connected Homeschooling.
Definitely.
So we'll be sure to link up to that. I'll put the code in the show notes. So if you're not subscribed yet on Connected Homeschooling, be sure to subscribe to the email list, and you'll be able to find the information there. So Mary, thank you for joining me on Connected Homeschooling. I've really enjoyed hearing about your journey, and it's a journey that's continuing. And so, look forward to keeping in touch and also sharing this interview with our listeners. So, thank you
Th-
so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
It was a pleasure.